Well, my wife and I have lived in a couple of different places over the course of our marriage, and one of those was a city in the Midwest. And we spent about a year in an apartment when we first got there, and that bought us some time to kind of get to know the area and find a place where we could potentially buy a house and settle in. And we had looked at a bunch of places, couldn't find anything in our price range, and then one day we just happened to be driving on the east side of the city, and we came across a neighborhood we had never been through before, and it seemed nice. The houses were affordable. It wasn't far from the church where I was working. And so the only problem was we had never heard about it. We had never heard anybody talking about it. So there's this guy at the church where I worked who was like the resident historian. I feel like every church has one of these people who just knows everything about the city. They know the history, they know the neighborhoods, the schools, you name a street, they could tell you all about it. And so I asked this guy about this neighborhood on the east side, and without skipping a beat, he gave me this assessment. He said, okay, so people there, if you were to invite your neighbors to the symphony, they would say no every time. But if it's a country music concert, they'll say yes every time. And so what he was basically saying was all of the highbrow, educated, cultured people, they live on the west side. But all the uneducated hillbillies, they live on the east side. Well, that's where we ended up moving, and once we got there and got to know the people, this self-proclaimed expert of the area we found was absolutely right. There were some country folk who lived out over there. Now listen, we were a little bit different from them, but we grew to love them and spent many good years there. Isn't it funny how neighborhoods and areas of town can develop an entire reputation? I bet even now, if I were to rattle off a couple of city names to you, you'd be able to give me some kind of assessment about the people there, you know? That's where the rich people live. Oh, don't go there at nighttime. That's really dangerous. Oh, that area? Don't go there at daytime. That's really dangerous. You know, we all have this understanding of what the reputation of an area is. And this is nothing new. This has been going on since people multiplied and started building communities, and that was certainly the case during the days of Jesus' public ministry. And at the outset of John chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples were traveling, and they were coming across an area that had a reputation as one that you were supposed to avoid. And how Jesus handled this speaks a lot to our lives today. So let's read about it. If you have a Bible or a device with a Bible on it, why don't you make your way to the New Testament Gospel of John chapter 4. And we're going to begin reading in verse 1. And it says, "Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria." So our text begins with Jesus and his disciples. They're in southern Israel. They run into some interference, and Jesus is like, all right, we're going back up north. Now, obviously back then, they didn't have GPS navigation tools like what you and I have available to us today. But if they did, it might look something like this. So Jesus and his disciples were down there in the area of Jerusalem, and they were working their way up north to Capernaum in Galilee. Now, on most of our navigation apps, you have the option to pick fastest route. So as you see on this map, the fastest route was to go right through Samaria, right there in the middle. But most Jews didn't take that route. They took an alternative route, as indicated here by the red dotted line. And it was much longer. So why would they do this? Because they were trying to avoid that area of Samaria altogether. Why is this? Well, the Jews and the Samaritans had a beef that was over 7 centuries old. See, way back in 772 BC, the Assyrians came in and conquered northern Israel and exiled all the people. So the only ones who remained in the country were the lowest rungs of society. And they intermarried with their Assyrian conquerors. And they maintained some aspects of their Jewish identity, but then they took on all the pagan practices of the Assyrians. Well, the purebred Jews, whose forefathers had to endure decades of living as strangers in a foreign land, they looked at these people who are now known as the Samaritans. They didn't even look at them as real Jews. They looked at them as sellouts. that they didn't even hold on to their ethnic heritage. Instead, they sold out and started taking on all these other practices, and they hated the Samaritans. Well, Samaritans weren't interested in friendship or affirmation from the Jews, so they reciprocated that hatred right on back. So the Jews and the Samaritans had a cultural understanding some 700 plus years old that we just ought to avoid one another. Well, Jesus wasn't like most Jews. And John tells us that he had to go through Samaria. He wasn't doing it because it was the fastest route. Jesus wasn't interested in saving time. He was interested in saving people. Let's keep reading. Verse 5. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. So Jesus was tired, and he sat down at a well, and his disciples were off, and now he found himself one-to-one with one of the women from this town in Samaria. And he simply asked her for some water. Here's how she responded. Verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." She was probably stunned by the kindness of Jesus. She likely saw a Jewish man sitting there and probably expected to be ignored or judged or berated. Instead, this nice man made a nice request. He was thirsty. He was hoping that she could share some of the water. And so even though he was pretty nice, you don't just gloss over 700 years of your relatives hating each other. So by all indications, she denied Jesus' request. Verse 10, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." This one statement made by Jesus framed up the whole rest of their conversation. Now, if you've been around church for a little while, you've likely heard a message preached about Jesus and the Samaritan woman. In fact, just last May, we covered this as part of a message series about women in the Bible. And so for the purpose of our time today, I'm not going to get into the details of the conversation, though I would encourage you to read it on your own because it's one of the most fascinating back and forth dialogues we have in the New Testament. So I don't want to so much focus on what happened during the conversation. I want to focus on what happened after the conversation. So Jesus called this woman out on her sordid past with men, including the extramarital affair she was currently in, but instead of condemning her or talking down to her, he helped her to see that God loves people of all nations, and even she can be welcomed into his kingdom. He captured this woman's attention, and even though her heart was being pricked, she still tried to wrap this conversation up. Jump down to verse 25. The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming, and when he comes, he'll explain everything to us." She was trying to bring this conversation to a close. I bet you've done the same thing. I bet you found yourself in some kind of sensitive conversation and you wanted a subtle way to wrap it up, so you got some go-to lines like, "Oh, I'm sure it'll work itself out. Everything happens for a reason," or good times. Translation, "I'm done talking. We're out of this conversation." That seems to be what this woman was doing. She's like, "Okay, well, someday Messiah's coming. I'll just ask him. Have a good day." Verse 26. Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." Jesus looked this woman dead in the eye and basically told her, the Messiah isn't coming someday. The Messiah has come today, and he's standing right in front of you. And these words pierced this woman's soul, and this was shaping up to be one of those special moments. But then it came crashing to a halt. Verse 27. Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find Jesus talking with a woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" So then come the disciples, come barging in. They're holding their takeout bags from lunch, and they suddenly stop and see Jesus speaking to the sworn enemy. And so they just stand there and stare in awkward silence. So much for this moment being special. Verse 28, then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. So this lady, she bolted so fast that she even forgot the reason she was coming to the well in the first place. But she wasn't running to get out of an awkward conversation. She was running to go tell the other people in her town to come explore Jesus for themselves. Now, like so many interactions that Jesus has with people in the Gospels, there are multiple layers. The first one was between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. But the next one occurs with Jesus and his disciples. Let's keep reading. Verse 31. Meanwhile, his disciples urged him, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Then his disciples said to each other, could someone have brought him food? Verse 34, my food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. What's with the disciples and food all the time? You know, last week we talked about the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, how the disciples almost missed it because they wanted to get all the crowds out of there so that the disciples could eat dinner. Now they just chased off this woman so they could eat lunch, always with food on the mind. And Jesus helped them see, hey, there is something that brings a deeper satisfaction than just filling your bellies, and that is to spend your life investing in the things that matter to God. Verse 35, don't you have a saying, it's still 4 months until harvest? So Jesus used a quote of the day. Now, obviously, people back then didn't have the modern conveniences we have today, like a supermarket, one central place you can go to buy all of your grocery needs. Back then, they had to work for it. They had to put the seeds in the soil, work the ground, eventually reap the harvest. And so they had this saying, it's still 4 months before we harvest. And the idea behind the saying was, hey, nothing's urgent. We got plenty of time. Chill out. Everything's fine. So Jesus quoted this saying, and then he added a piece to it. Verse 35 continues. He says, I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. What Jesus was saying is, hey, harvest isn't in 4 months. It's right now. And he told them, open your eyes. What was it Jesus wanted to see? Over the shoulders of the disciples was an entire town of Samaritans running to Christ. Talk about a harvest. And then he reminded them of their mission. Verse 38, I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor. So Jesus was reminding them, hey, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Now, it wasn't the disciples that sowed the seeds of the gospel. That happened with the Old Testament prophets, John the Baptist, Jesus himself. But now it was the disciples' job to harvest, to tell a hungry world about Jesus. Verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in Jesus because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. There's so much irony in this one verse. Because during the ministry of Jesus, think about how many Jews rejected the testimony of the perfect Son of God and would not believe in Jesus. Yet here we have Samaritans embracing the testimony of a sinful woman and believing in Jesus. And the irony didn't stop there. It says, verse 40, so when the Samaritans came to Jesus, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. The disciples would have been happy never traveling to Samaria. Now they found themselves lodging in Samaria. I mean, this kind of stuff should never have happened. I mean, this would be like a bunch of Dodger fans and all of their blue and white gear having to travel through San Francisco and come across a whole bunch of Giants fans in their black and orange gear. And the Giants fans say to the Dodger fans, hey, come on over. We're going to feed you. We want to spend time with you, get to know you. That never happens. Right? But this is the power of Jesus. With the Jews and the Samaritans, he took down walls that were standing strong for over 7 centuries. And look what continued, verse 41. Because of Jesus' words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we've heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." What a beautiful description of who Jesus is. The one who saves people of every nation, not just Jews, not just Samaritans, but all people. So what does this matter for you and I today? Well, I think a lot of us are like Jesus' disciples. Too many of us care more about eating lunch than following Christ. And Jesus wants us to see something so much bigger. You know, for these disciples, before Jesus stepped into their life, their world was really small. They'd get up, they'd go to work, go to synagogue on Saturdays, repeat it the next week. They pretty much stayed with the same group of people in the same region. But when Jesus invited them to follow him, he took these guys on the adventure of a lifetime. He took them to places they never dreamed they'd ever visit. He exposed them to people they never dreamed they'd interact with. And all the while, he modeled to them that he loves and cares for people of all nations. And what if Jesus is inviting us on a similar adventure? You know, some of the last words he told his disciples before ascending to heaven was this, recorded in Acts 1:8. He said, "You'll receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria," hello, "and to the ends of the earth." And what Jesus was commanding his disciples then, which ultimately extends to his disciples now, is he wants them to take the good news of Jesus locally, Jerusalem, nationally, Judea and Samaria, and globally to the ends of the earth. Jesus wants his people to take the gospel worldwide. Now that seems like a pretty big task, doesn't it? I mean, how in the world do people like you and me, how do we even do this? It seems so overwhelming. Well, I want to give you a couple of practical ideas around how we can share God's heart for the world. So if you're taking notes, jot this down. Here's the first one. Start small. Some of us have an all or nothing mentality that I'm either going to entirely ignore God's call to the nations or I'm going to sell everything I have and move to Mongolia. You know, if I'm not organizing some global social media campaign, advocating for workers' rights in Zimbabwe, I'm just not doing it right. Listen, an all or nothing approach will paralyze you into doing nothing. Instead, let's learn from Jesus, even in this interaction, and start small. That's what Jesus did. And it began with a couple of small decisions, such as this one. Verse 4, now he had to go through Samaria. There were times in Jesus' ministry where he took his disciples to faraway places. This was not one of those times. Samaria wasn't far away. It was right en route to the place they were already going. It turns out that right in their own backyard were a group of people from a different ethnicity with different religious practices and different cultural norms. All they did was decide to stop over. Here where we live in Southern California, we have exposure to people of a lot of different nations. We can interact with people from Latin America, Asia, South America, Africa, the Pacific Islands, and so many more. In many ways, we don't have to go overseas because the nations have come to us. And right in Jesus' own backyard was this group of people. And so he just made one small choice. Let's just stop there. And then he made another small choice. Verse 7, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Jesus didn't preach her a sermon. He didn't small talk her to death with some boring topic nobody cares about. All he did was ask a question. Does that sound so hard? Start small. Here's an idea. Just pick a country of the world that fascinates you. Do a basic Google search on it. Learn about the people, their practices, their religious beliefs, how they feel about Jesus, how Christians are treated in their nation, and just start praying for them and see what God does. For those of you with kids, here's an idea. Maybe just try driving into a neighborhood that attracts an ethnicity different from your own. Stop at the park. Let your kids play with the other kids in the playground. For those of you who don't have children, take your fur children. Go to the dog park. And when you see someone, just simply ask a question. I'll give you an example of a conversation I recently had. I was at a place and I saw some people who were wearing outfits that seemed to indicate that they might not be from this country. So I just asked them, "Where are you from?" And they responded, "Fontana." Okay. So here's my next question. "Oh, were you born and raised there?" "No, actually, we're from India." "Tell me, what brings you here?" And just like that, we're off to the races. Does that sound so hard? Friends, just start small. That's what Jesus did. So here's another way we could share God's heart for the world. Start small. The second one, see past. Critical to understanding God's heart for the world is that we have to be willing to see past the very obvious surface differences with other people. We've got to be willing to see past how a person looks or what the reputation is. Jesus refused to allow the racial biases of his day to prevent him from ministering to a Samaritan. He saw right past the stereotypes and let this woman know that she too can be a part of God's kingdom. And you remember what her response to Jesus' question was? It said in verse 9, the Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Can you imagine just being hot and sitting down and you see somebody who's different from you and you ask if you could share their water bottle? They'd be like, "Ugh, I don't know where their lips have been. I don't know what they do in their culture." Jesus asking this woman for water was basically saying that he had no problem being on the same level with her. Even though there's all these purity laws that the Jewish traditions had at that day about what you can eat and what you can drink, Jesus didn't care about somebody looking at him as defiled. He asked the woman for a drink. It wasn't that long ago that in our own nation, there were actual laws in place to segregate black people from the broader culture. And here's an example of one of those laws. I have a picture up here on the screen. This was taken from the 1950s in Wilmington, North Carolina. And there was a belief back then that if a white person drank from the same spot as a black person, that they would acquire some kind of disease. So they literally segregated drinking fountains. And to understand the kind of cultural barriers Jesus was crossing with the Samaritan woman would be to picture Jesus walking the earth during this time in the most segregated southern state, past a huge crowd of people walking right up to the colored fountain and drinking deeply. That will help us understand the gravity of what was taking place in this moment. Jesus was willing to see past the very obvious differences and still minister to the person anyway. And for all of us, we've got to be willing to see past a skin color different from the one we have, or a language different from the one we speak, different clothing, different customs. If your opinion about the world is solely developed by watching the news or thumbing through social media, then there's a high likelihood you've already written off entire segments of people. Democrats, Republicans, Palestinians, Jews, gays, trans people, whatever. You know what all of these people have in common? They all need Jesus just like you do. And listen, no one is outside of the transforming work of Christ, but it's really hard to share the gospel with someone you've already dismissed. We've got to be willing to take the same posture of Jesus and see past this stuff. That means we got to put an end to the ethnic jokes. Stop posting articles that don't reflect biblical values. And we've got to shed those long-held biases that were passed down to us from our relatives. And if we want to share God's heart for the world, we've got to see past that stuff. So, first one, this is great too. Look at this. So Jesus lived this out, and this is one of my favorite interactions. This is from John chapter 8. He was in a verbal showdown with the religious leaders, and look what they said to him. The Jews answered him, "Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" So they were slamming Jesus. They called him a Samaritan. And I love how Jesus responded. Look at verse 49. He said, "I am not possessed by a demon." Notice that Jesus never said, "I am not a Samaritan." He was quick to dismiss the dark forces of hell. But as for the accusation about being a Samaritan, he was okay with that one. Probably because he just saw lots of Samaritans place their faith in him. They were family now. And Jesus saw past all of that and ministered to them as a result. So, you want to share God's heart for the world? Start small. 2, see past. Here's one more. Step through. God will open doors for you. It's up to us to step through them. And a brief look back on this passage in John chapter 4 shows us all of the open doors and how Jesus stepped through each one. Even the verbs are the same in all of these. So check this out. Here's door number 1, verse 5. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar. That was the first open door, an opportunity to go to this town. Jesus stepped through it. Door number 2, when a Samaritan woman came. So now Jesus made contact with one of the locals. That door opened. He stepped through it. Door number 3, verse 28. The woman went back to town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" So Jesus stepped through this door. A one-to-one conversation now ballooned into involving all kinds of people from the town. Door number 4. They came out of the town and made their way toward him. So now Jesus had a larger audience. Another door opened to him. He stepped through that one. That led to door number 5. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. So consider all the open doors Jesus stepped through. A Samaritan well, a Samaritan woman, a conversation, an invitation, and then a 2-day Jesus conference hosted by, wait for it, Samaritans. It's incredible to see this take place. And I don't think Jesus would have had the same success if him and his disciples just showed up at the city gates and knocked on the door and said, "Let us in." Or set up a loudspeaker and a microphone and just started preaching. Instead, he walked through the doors that were opened before him. Friends, spiritual impact happens one step at a time. And as you share God's heart, he will open doors before you. The question is, are you willing to step through them? I want to share with you today a story of a man from this church who did that very thing, who just kept stepping through the doors that God was opening. And he found himself involved in international missions, but that was never the original plan. So will you join me in welcoming to the stage Brendan Biggs? Hey, Brendan.
Good morning.
All right, so I want to begin. Just tell people, when did you come to Christ?
Let's see. So I was raised Catholic and went to that church for many years, but then I stopped going. And about 14 years ago, I was invited to a Christian church from some friends and rededicated my life to Christ, got baptized, and then started my journey in Christianity.
Right on. And what did you do for your professional life?
So I'm retired. I was a public works director at County of San Bernardino, so I was civil engineering, and then I retired a couple years ago.
Okay, so recently retired. Got a new second act before you. So how are you planning on spending that time?
So along the way, I really got interested in apologetics and theology, so I got some degrees, and I was leading some online Bible studies, and just taking what I was learning in school on topics that you normally wouldn't study, like the doctrine of the Trinity and Bible reliability, those kind of intellectual topics, and I really enjoyed that. So I wanted to continue doing that, and I would get some people from overseas that would occasionally Zoom in. And then a couple of years ago, we had a young gentleman from Pakistan, and that started me on that journey.
Okay, so what drew you to want to study things like apologetics, which is a defense of the Christian faith, or theology?
Well, I'm kind of a nerd in the sense of, engineering, and I really like the intellectual stuff. So that really drew me to that. We have some of the greatest thinkers, in all of history that are Christians. So I wanted to study them, and it was just really kind of scratched that intellectual itch that I had.
Okay, so you're starting to get into this. Retirement comes. You now have some time, and you're now in these online groups and sharing some of the things that you learned. And through that, what happened?
So a young gentleman, he's a youth pastor in Pakistan, joined our group. The topic was very important to them over in Pakistan. And so we connected with him offline, started learning all about Pakistan. I didn't even know where it was on a map or what their needs were, but they have a lot of challenges in Pakistan. Not only is it a poor country, but there are daily challenges to Christians over there. About 97% are non-Christians. So they get daily challenges to why are you a Christian? And he really needed some of these types of studies for his youth group.
Okay, so you two connected offline, and what did that relationship look like?
He was a really friendly person, and I really enjoyed just talking about him and learning about him, seeing what the needs and the challenges were over there. And he spoke English. His group there spoke Urdu, which is their main language there. But I helped them put together some studies, and then I started teaching them on these topics, and learned a lot along the way.
Okay, so what are the kinds of things that someone in Pakistan, a Christian in Pakistan, is struggling with?
A number of human needs that they have, of course, with the poverty, just basic education. As far as Christians go, they're always being challenged, why are you a Christian? And they actually have a program there in Pakistan where they'll train Muslims, it's called Dawah, to attack Christians intellectually, and they will study the Bible not the right way, but they'll find little verses and will challenge them. And if they're not prepared, they can, become a Muslim.
Okay, so you step through this door of doing these online groups. You meet this guy. You kind of took it a step further, got to know him a little bit. Where'd it go from there?
So they're 12 hours different. So when they would get out on Sundays to do their youth group at 12 or 1 o'clock p.m., that's midnight, 1 p.m. my time, so that's when I would get up, and I would conduct these studies with them, and then I'd wake up in the morning and wonder if it was just a dream. Maybe I'm too into apologetics. I'm dreaming about having some strange dreams. And then from there, started looking at some of their needs. Their students were really not looking forward to much of a life with, when they weren't educated, so started sponsoring some of them to go to local trade schools and get educated. They all graduated, and they donated the first check to their church. So there's a lot of opportunities. A little bit goes a long way over there. So I was really blessed by being able to do that.
Okay, so now you're starting to meet larger groups of other people in Pakistan. All that's just sort of stemming from this little online Zoom group that you were in.
Yeah, just from a little online Zoom in this connection, and I really didn't think it was going to go very far, but the more I did, the more I kept getting involved. So I connected with another young Pakistani who wanted to start a Christian elementary school, so we helped resource there. We're up to 150 kids now. We started last year. So we're teaching, the kids secular education, but as well as the Bible, and we're connecting with some colleges over there for scholarships. That took off, and then also connected with some seminary students over there, so I would provide some training to supplement that, and then we started doing these medical camps.
Okay, so tell us a little more about that.
So they're full-time nurses, and got a couple of doctors that are studying with the seminary. So what they want to do is they go into poor areas, and we set up 4 stations. The first station is we'll feed the people, and we usually get a couple hundred people that show up to this. And then the second station is to do a wellness check, check blood pressure and all that, and have medicines for them. Then we'll start looking at their spiritual needs. We'll hand out free Bibles, audio Bibles for those that can't read. And then the fourth station is where they do evangelism and answer questions. That's where they get to put their seminary training to work.
It's pretty incredible to look at these details. Now, one of them came to come visit here, right, from Pakistan.
Yeah, we brought him over in June, so he was able to attend his first American church, which is Sunrise, and he just was amazed by, the music and our whole setup here. And then I'm the prayer team lead over at the Rialto Peace Center, so I brought him there on a Friday, and he was able to help me out at the prayer team, praying for people over here, and he just had a blast, and it really blessed him, and the people really enjoyed him praying for him.
Isn't it wild to just think about this whole process? So you have somebody in their retirement years who decides to share some of their knowledge in a little online group. You meet someone from Pakistan, and then you meet more people from Pakistan. It starts spreading in schools. Then somebody from Pakistan comes here and is praying for people in Rialto at the Peace Center. It's an incredible thing that God has opened. Could you have ever imagined that this would have been how you're going to be spending your retirement years?
Yeah, no, not at all. I thought I would just continue doing what I was doing in these community groups by leading that, and this has just sent me on a real journey. And Tuesday mornings we have a little community group full of Pakistans. I lead some of them, they lead some of them, so it's just a blast. Every time we meet somebody, we have them join our group, and it's just been a lot of fun.
And you're getting up at midnight to do this.
Yeah, that one's at 7 a.m., which is better,
Okay.
but I still get up sometimes.
Right on. Well, I want to invite David Gomez out here. In addition to overseeing our local outreach, he also provides some oversight with our global initiatives. And, David, we had gotten connected with Brendan and how God was using one of our own to make an impact in Pakistan. So we just started talking, how can we as a church get behind this door that God's opened to us? Why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was amazing not only working with Brendan to be able to think through some of those passions, but, Sunrise Church has a bit of a criteria for people to send in some of those kind of things. And so I was able to meet with Brendan, and, one of the criteria that Sunrise looks at before we partner with anybody is making sure that, one, financial transparency is a huge thing. If we're going to send any kind of finances anywhere, Sunrise Church wants to be able to understand where the finances are going and how we're partnering. The second thing is, do they align with Sunrise mission? The mission and vision of Sunrise Church. Is the partnership that we have going to align with those missions and values? And after meeting with Brendan, we realized that the opportunity to feed people, to do the medical supplies, as well as provide Bibles and discipleship was right in line with what we wanted to do. So we were excited to partner with Brendan.
And so we did one of those events a couple of months ago, right? I think there's the picture. They had the little sunrise sign up in Pakistan, which is a bit surreal to see. But we have something else that they're going to be doing an event sometime coming up that we're also going to kind of help.
Yeah, so we have an event right around the corner, and you talked a little bit about starting small. We would love for prayer for an opportunity. In September 13th, we're going to do another medical and food camp, and this is a great opportunity to see people not only come receive medical supplies, food, but also the opportunity to see other people get their lives transformed by Jesus, to be able to receive the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we're excited to see what's going to happen at this next medical camp. So great opportunity for the congregation to pray with us, to be able to be there and help assist in this next mission.
That's cool. So that's coming up September 13th
September
in Pakistan.
13th.
Yeah. And even for us as a church, we don't know where this is going, but we'll step through the doors that God opens to us. Brendan, one last question. You have a lot of excuses of why you should not be doing this. Look, you already worked hard, you retired. This is where you're supposed to kick your feet back. You have a wife at home who's got some medical challenges that require you to be there a little more. Getting up in the middle of the night. There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do this. And I think when somebody hears kind of your story, you might feel like, well, he's really smart, and educated and can teach all this stuff. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who they would say, how could I help with something like this in Pakistan?
Yeah, I can tell you this has really blessed me. And everybody out here has something that you can contribute to places like Pakistan. They need people that practice English. So you can just zoom in on them and have them read a Bible verse or just some conversational skills. That goes a long way when they learn English over there. Invite them to your men's or women's Bible study. They would love to attend that. And everybody that you attend, they'll go back and multiply this with their own Bible study groups. Just be a mentor to them. A lot of them are young and they're newly married and have kids. They would love to interact with people going through those challenges. If you have groups that support that, they don't have what we have in that way. So invite them. They're super friendly. They call me through the week and just on every little topic. So it'll really bless you. So you've already been given permission. The Bible says go, so just go do it.
Amen. Can we thank Brendan and Dave for being up here? Thanks, guys. And if you're interested in learning more about how you can be involved with Brennan or with David, even things that we're doing through the Peace Center, they're going to be outside and outside with me after service. Come on by and talk to them. They'd love to get you connected. After Jesus spent 2 days in that Samaritan village, living with the people, eating with the people, teaching the people the scriptures, this was the conclusion they arrived at. John 4:42, they said, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." It's one thing to see someone else believing. It's entirely different to believe for you. And maybe that's what describes you this morning. You've heard stories of other people's faith in Christ, but what about your own?